Welcome to the Mooi Speckle Park podcast, where we look behind the scenes at the incredible breed designed to maximise profit, minimise inputs, and build a high-performance commercial beef herd. This episode is sponsored by Speckle Park's 7th annual Bull and Female Sale, hosted in Yeovil, New South Wales on Friday, 4th of April 2025. To get instant access to the catalogue and sale offering information, simply visit jadspecklepark.com.au. Welcome, Paul. We have Paul Gore here today from Mooi Speckle Park and Speckle Park Certified to be at Londrigan in Victoria, which is near Wangaratta. Paul, welcome.
Thank you very much, Amy.
Can you introduce yourself as if someone else were introducing you?
I suppose that depends on if they like me or they don't. I'm a father of three. I'm a Speckle Park cattle breeder. I'm a former bloodstock agent. As you said, we live in Londrigan in northeast Victoria. I'm very family orientated, passionate about what I do, enthusiastic about what I do, pretty data and analytically orientated. Like to think that I can learn from a whole range of people, and happy to change my position and change my mind if confronted with evidence to do so.
That's the way. If we cast your mind back to childhood, what's your favourite childhood memory? And did anything from your childhood inspire you to take the career path you chose?
From when I was about 6 years old, I used to go to a horse riding camp every school holidays. My parents had their own business. I was an only child, so they were always busy. So I'd get packed off to the horse riding camp. So I was enamoured with horses from when I was young. And when I was about 13, we moved to a small acreage holding on the edge of quite a large cattle breeding operation. And the chap there took me under his wing and taught me a lot, and we inspected a lot of cattle. And I sort of always felt a draw to breeding. Like I bred birds and budgies and finches and quail and sold them to local pet shops. And when we went to the country, I got a job at the calf scales where the dairy farmers would bring their calves and they'd weigh them, get paid per kilo, and I'd get paid a calf every 2 weeks I worked there, and I'd take them home and rear them. And then sort of just grew from that. But probably my favourite childhood memories all probably really evolve around sport. I played a lot of sport when I was young. I was very fortunate. The soccer club I played at had a really good coach at the time where he was a senior coach and I was 13 and 14. He was also the coach of Australia, a guy called Frank Arrock. And so we were able as young guys to get access to that knowledge and that drive of what made people really successful. Yeah, so they're probably my best memories, playing sport with friends and travelling around the state.
So how did that interest in cattle and genetics progress?
So when I was a little bit older, so I was probably 16, I met a Hereford cattle breeder called Don Fairbrother. He was probably earlier. I was probably 15 because it was about 1984. He had a significant, probably 700 or 800 strong commercial cow herd of Herefords that were all performance recorded. So they didn't have group breed plan at the time. So he had in-herd breed plan. So I'd go and work with him, and then would sit of an evening and go through all the EBVs that he had on his herd, go through other bull herds, because you couldn't compare that. They weren't comparable at the time because it was only within herd EBVs. And I learned a lot about how they worked and what their value was, even though it was in the infancy of the breed. Because I always then had an interest in racing as well. My mother is Irish, and I used to get the end of season racing tapes from Europe as my birthday present at the end of the year each year. And I'd watch all these great thoroughbreds that were racing in these European classics. And so got increasingly interested in their pedigrees and what was happening. Probably the turning point from that point. And so there's a bit of a crossover between the two things happening at the same time. One point I'm really interested in racing, but no access to horses really. And the other, I'm interested in breeding and getting mentored by Don Fairbrother about conformation, about the importance of fertility and all those things. Probably one of the important things is, in one of the racing tapes featured a horse called El Gran Senor, who in 1986 was the champion 3-year-old in Europe. And that deal had been struck. And this is probably the thing that probably shaped my future as much as anything, this story. A deal had been struck before the Epsom Derby to sell a half share in him for $40 million US in 1986. But the proviso was he had to win the race. He had to win the Derby. El Gran Senor was trained by Vincent O'Brien, a legendary trainer in Ireland. Was owned by Robert Sangster and John Magna, the current owner of Cornwall Stud, probably the biggest stud in the world now. And Derby Day turns up, and El Gran Senor's favourite, and he ends up getting beat an inch by a horse called Secreto, who was trained by Vincent O'Brien's son, David. So I couldn't believe, which put an end to the deal. And Sangster and Vincent O'Brien are walking back dejected after getting beaten and losing this big deal. And they walk past Lester Piggott, who had formerly been the jockey, and he turned to them and said, "Do you miss me?" And then El Gran Senor went to start it ultimately and turned out to be subfertile. So not only did they lose a $40 million deal on selling half of him, that he didn't turn out, he was a very successful sire, but he was subfertile, so he didn't produce that many progeny. So it was a bit of a disaster and a bit of a lesson in that there's extraordinary heights, but there's extraordinary lows too.
So can you provide listeners, I guess, to extend on what you've just detailed, a bit more of an overview about your career to date, from school, study, that career in the racehorse industry, and ultimately where we've ended up with now?
So I went to school in Gippsland at Gippsland Grammar and Sale. It's for secondary school, and I boarded there for the last couple of years. Then went to La Trobe University and did agricultural science. Then in 91, I won. Stock and Land had a national performance judging competition where they included EBVs plus physical assessment of animals, and they did. So in 1990, I won the Melbourne heat, and then the rest of the shows around Australia, the royal shows around Australia, all had heats, and then we all came together in 1991 to see who was going to be national champion. And I was fortunate enough to win that title. And on the back of that, got some great opportunities to deal with some really good cattle people. And John Canavan at Mansfield, a big Simmental breeder there. I did a lot of work with him over the next 5 or 6 years. David Emerson at Hereford and Simmental breeder down in the Western District, I worked with him. But I also got approached by CMEX, who had just started in Australia, to go and work with them as their beef cattle expert. The job offer I had was for sort of probably 60-70% more pay than any ag graduate had ever been paid. So I jumped at the chance, took the job because it wasn't going to be there forever. And so I didn't finish my degree and went and worked with CMEX and worked there for best part of 2 years, and was just getting to the point where horses and racing were going to be my life. I didn't come off a farm, so I was never going to be able to go back on a farm. Working in corporate wasn't going to really get me where I wanted to go, and I just genuinely loved racing. So I got a job with Bloodstock agent sort of when I was 22, turning 23, and I worked for them for about 18 months, ran their operation here in Victoria, selecting yearlings, managing syndicates, did a lot of race planning, and then got to the point where I just wanted to go out on my own and do my own thing. And so in 94, I started Heritage Bloodstock, bought 2 horses. The first horse I sold in a week, and I thought, this is really great, this is good, I can do this. And then the second horse I couldn't sell one share of, and ended up racing her myself, and she turned out to be quite successful. So that turned out to be a bit of a bonus in the end, a mare called Rancho Rose. She was my first Flemington winner. Yeah, so, and that started from there. I built a syndication business. So at its peak, we probably had 60, 65 horses on the books, probably 400 clients. We sort of would do 20 share syndicates where people had just 5% of a horse and people had a bit of fun. But it got to the point where when we had success, what would often happen is, so if we bought a horse for $30,000 or $40,000 and we turned it into $300,000, and someone's ended up, who's got a 20% share, ends up with $15,000, they didn't put the $15,000 back into horses. They'd buy a new car, or they'd take the family on a holiday, or they'd pay off some debt, and they'd had their fun, and they didn't want to get much more than that. So we sort of pivoted more into the breeding industry and managing broodmare portfolios and dealing with bigger yearling buyers, so who had the capacity to just keep tipping in if they wanted. And that sort of evolved into me sort of branching out. I had a client base who were hungry to have racetrack success, and I started looking to buy horses that were already had performance. It's a lot less risk, and started pursuing horses overseas to bring back to Australia. So the first horse we did that with was a mare called Perfect Promise from South Africa. She won her first start for us in the CF4 Stakes at Caulfield, a Group 1 race, and that was my first Group 1 winner in Australia. And I thought, wow. So I started travelling more to South Africa and bringing more horses back to here and to Dubai. And those travels to South Africa opened up more doors. So we started exporting horses from Australia to South Africa. From there, I was given the opportunity to do some consultancy work for Inglis, William Inglis and Son, it's one of the main sales companies in Australia. So I consulted to them for about 10 years, and developed their market in South Africa and in the Middle East. And then was pretty busy, as you can imagine. A lot of travel. I'd spend sort of 170, 180 nights a year on the road, and got to the point where the kids were 10, 11, 12, and they wanted to spend more time with me. They wanted to, I'd been divorced at the time, and the kids wanted to come and live with me, and I had to make a call about what I was going to do, and it just wasn't feasible to spend the time with the kids that they wanted and that I wanted and continue to be traipsing around the world buying horses. So I had to find another path, and one thing led to another, and that led us to Speckle Park, and I curtailed my travels and converted our horse assets into bovine assets, and here we are.
So how did you first come across the breed?
I don't recall how I first noticed them, but I do recall dismissing them. Just thought they're belted Galloway with a different coloured coat pattern. Didn't really think much more of them. So I was weighing up whether we bred Wagyu, and I just thought, I can't look at these things every day. And I didn't want to breed Angus because I just didn't think the scale and the calibre of the Angus breeders around us were just too high. I just was never going to be able to compete well against them. They just had, like when you've got Tamania with 2,500 cows and Hazeldean with 3,500 cows and Rennie Lee with 2,000 cows, and they've just got an advantage over the smaller operators. A mutual friend of David Reed and mine told me that David Reed was into Speckle Park, and I was shocked. I didn't know David, but I knew his father, Bruce, and Bruce was a terrific racing man and had some great success. And when he passed away, David basically shut the whole racing enterprise down and got rid of the horses. And the mail was that he's a very conservative, sensible businessman. He's not a risk taker, and this isn't for him. So when I heard he's breeding Speckle Park, I was mystified. I thought, why are you, as a serious cattle businessman, why are you doing this? So I rang him out of the blue and told him who I was and how I knew him through Ferg, and who had a stud at Wellington there, not far from you, at Bell River. We had a chat and he went through why they were involved. Then we continued to chat for a bit, and we then had a look at some data that they had assembled that had a group of animals go through a feedlot, and there were 200 Angus steers, there were 100 F1 steers, 100 F1 heifers, and they'd put 97 purebred heifers on feed at this particular feedlot. The feed conversion rates were staggering. The Angus steers averaged 6.3, the F1 steers averaged 4.8, the F1 heifers averaged 4.3, and the purebred heifers averaged 3.93 kilos of feed to kilos of weight gain. I thought, this is just a game changer. This is something really... So I started then travelling around looking at any stud that would let me on to have a look at their cattle. And then it was February, I was doing yearling inspections in the Hunter Valley in 2017. And I saw a group of just weaned Speckle Park Santa Gertrudis weaners, and they were outstanding. So I rang Reiki and said, because I always drove to the Hunter, and I said, I'm going to take a few extra days and drive home, and drove to a few studs and bought the first lot of our females, our foundation females. Yeah.
And for those who don't know, David Reed owns Minamara Speckle Park, which is one of the largest studs in the world.
Absolutely.
Based at Cooler.
Yeah, so, and they're very thoughtful operation. So the fact that they were involved and were seeing the yields and the quality and the feed efficiencies and the fundamentals, just gave me terrific confidence to get involved.
Fantastic. So what would you say has been the highlight of your career to date?
Miss Andretti's pretty hard to beat. She was a horse we found in Perth and bought her as a tried horse, negotiated to bring her to Victoria, and then we bought 3/4 of her for a client, Ultra Thoroughbreds. She ended up winning. We thought we could win a Group 1 race in Adelaide for mares, the one Group 1 race for older mares in Australia, and we thought we could win that. We ultimately won that, but we won another 5 Group 1s as well, and she won the Golden Jubilee at Royal Ascot in front of the Queen. So that was a big highlight. Ugugu was really exciting because she was a very cheap yearling and lots of fun. Yeah, there's a lot of those, but yeah, Miss Andretti's pretty hard. She was Horse of the Year in Australia, so that's pretty hard to beat.
So if we move across to Speckle Park, what year did you start to Mooi Speckle Park, and what would you say are your breeding objectives within your stud?
We started looking 2015, started buying in 2017. So that's when we began. Only bought animals we could see, didn't buy embryos, bought physical, and this was before any EBVs or anything. So just assessed animals on their structure and their temperament. And always in the horse game, always said I will swap attitude for ability any day. And we bought that same approach. And I was always about hind leg structure, good length of hip, and good motion. So that's what we looked at in cattle. We made sure that they've got good short pasterns, good foot angle, good pastern angle, well set hind legs, good length of hip, good width of thurl, just structural basics of those things. And then temperament was just key. It is the thing that's so financially important to any enterprise, because those animals with poor temperaments, they just don't do. They're harder to handle. They make everything do worse. They make everything more stressful. So we just wanted to be really strong on that. And then the fundamentals were basically working on the information that we had. So I went and studied all the females I could find that had all the donors at the time who had progeny come to Australia. And I looked at their breeding records in Canada and their dams breeding records and their siblings breeding records to see who was fertile, who was not, who's having calves each and every year and who's not. And it was really revealing. Like, there were really high profile cows that hadn't calved till they were 5 or 6 years old in Canada, or hadn't had a registered calf, and then had only ever had one registered calf in their life. And then you trace their daughters and their family and found that they were not really productive. Yet there were others that were, like, there was a cow called Leanne Lily 2D who had 12 calves in 13 years. She calved before she was 2, and then she just did everything right. So we went and isolated those female families that had good breeding records, a history of good breeding records, and focused on those, then assessed those individuals on structure and temperament, and that's where we started. When we started buying bulls, it was based on how they were performing in their contemporary group. So Minamara Leander was our first main sire purchase, and he was the number one for growth in his contemporary group of 70-odd bulls. He was the number one for eye muscle area. He was the number one for scrotal size. He was number 3 or 4 for IMF percentage. And when I inspected him in that group of 70 bulls, I didn't know any of that information when I saw him for the first time, but he was a bull who just kept standing out. He just kept catching your eye, and you'd compare him to something else. You go, oh, he's a nice bull, and they'd end up beside each other in the group, and he just kept taking my eye. And then when I saw the data, I went, well, here's something pretty special.
So now for the signature question, how would you answer the question, why Speckle Park?
The answer is different now to what it was then. So then what I saw was an efficient, moderate, traditionally shaped beef cattle animal. I don't like the space race that happened in the 80s and 90s where people just selected for growth and more growth. I think it's counterproductive. And I saw that efficiency as really, really important to every operation, because, 70% of the cow-calf operation is the maintenance ration of the cows. So if you can reduce that feed cost, then it's money in the bank for producers. So that was one of the reasons. The yields that we'd heard about were impressive, and the eating quality was also impressive. Minamara had just started on their run of success at the paddock to pallet trials, and all the data I could find pointed me in the direction of that these animals are going to MSA grade really well and have a good quality carcass. So that was the answer then. The answer now is a bit different, which is, as you're well aware, Speckle Park eats very differently to other beef. So I think as an industry, we have to make a decision here somewhere where either beef is, and it's somewhat both to a degree, we're either a commodity that just gets traded as beef and beef and beef, or we're either a differentiatable product. So we're either like chicken or pork, or we're either like red wine and chocolate and coffee, where there's nuance to the flavours and there's different. Now, I tend to think the latter is the case. I think we have a nuanced product rather than just a commodity, and that's why I'm involved. We'll get to it later, but I've been dealing with a lot of chefs and a lot of people in the meat trade, and there's a real desire in the marketplace for something that's a bit different. Speckle Park is certainly different for reasons we can get into later, and it's really satisfying. You talk to people who eat it consistently, and the reports are all the same. Everyone talks about the flavour, the tenderness, the texture, the juiciness, the real umami flavour, how that flavour lingers in your mouth. Not all of us have the vocabulary to articulate what it's like, but everyone goes, oh, it's really good. Not everyone, but by far the majority. And it's certainly different. You put it side by side with an Angus and it tastes different. I'm not saying it's better, I'm not saying it's worse, just saying it's different. And I think that's something that's really important, because I'd hate to see beef cattle go the way that chicken and pork can just be a commodity. I think it would be a real shame. And I think if Angus continue their marches, especially down here in Southern Australia, just how strong they are, I think we risk losing something really important, not just with Speckle Park, but with a whole range of other breeds. And I'd love to see other breeds get on and talk about their eating quality and do some research and understand just what the nuances between the different breeds are. I mean, one of the best steaks I've ever eaten in my life was a Chianina in South Africa, and it was unbelievable. It was one of the most miraculous meals of my life. It was fantastic. So if you get the chance to consume some Chianina, get into it. It's fantastic. And I think it would be a shame if we lose those things.
What would you say are the three biggest strengths of the Speckle Park breed, and what are some of its weaknesses?
I think that the strength is that eating quality, but basically when you break it down to the fatty acid composition. So Speckle Park have a different fatty acid composition to Angus and some other breeds. They've got a low fat melting point, but that fatty acid composition results in the fat tasting differently. Now, fat is flavour, as a lot of chefs will tell you. If you look at duck fat potatoes, beef chips cooked in tallow, chips cooked in tallow, or mashed potato with heaps of butter, or the fat cap on a rack of lamb, like they're magnificent. Pork crackling, you can go on and on. And I think that fatty acid composition and the flavour of that fat's really, really important. I think our ability to marble, and especially at a young age, is vital, because that marbling on it from an eating quality perspective, it divides those muscle fibres. It basically injects those good tasting fats right into the heart of the steak. Those fats don't tend to come out when you cook that much. A lot of them stay within the piece of meat, and they coat those muscle fibres, which is partly, I believe, partly what gives that eating experience. So the ability to marble is really, really important. So I think that's one of the strengths. It's also a weakness. There's a whole heap of Speckle Park cattle that don't marble particularly well. But back to the strengths, and then the efficiency. The ability to convert feed efficiently into beef is really, really important. And I think that's where we need to really focus on making sure that as operators, we're doing things to operate as efficiently as we can. So we carve down we make sure cows are rebreeding, we're selecting for fertility, we're selecting for structure. So we're culling on the right things, not being forced to cull through breakdown and so forth. So I think they're the real strength, that fatty acid composition, the ability to marble, and the feed efficiency. With the weaknesses, I think that the lack of information is a problem in certain sectors, and an understanding of how Speckle Park developed is probably not as well understood by a lot of breeders. Most of the operations in Canada are pretty tight. They didn't expand outside their own herds very much, so they got very tight gene pools. Some of them even had very high inbreeding coefficients of up to 38%, and you probably don't want to be above 10 or even 5. So that makes it challenging if you don't understand that. But what happens when you combine those programs together, you can get some hybrid vigor, which is really valuable, which I think we're seeing in our herd when we've done that in the past. But that lack of information on things that are really important, as I said, marbling is a really important factor in the quality of the carcasses that we're going to produce. If we're going to be a product rather than just a commodity, we need to make sure we marble well enough to deliver those delicious fatty acids into the muscle. Now, the reality is that in Canada, people aren't regularly scanning animals and inputting that into a system, so we're not finding out who are the good performers and who aren't. For example, the highest marbling bulls to come out of Canada, A&W 15R and his son Untapped, and then his son Unmarked. Now, if their progeny hadn't been tested here in Australia, we wouldn't know any of that. So I think selecting for that's a problem in a market where we really have to stand up. We'll get to Speckle Park Certified later, but one of the key real pressure points is, are the carcasses going to be good enough when they end up at the restaurant or in the butcher shop? And as breeders, we really need to make sure that we've got a real focus on making sure that we're giving those animals the genetic ability to marble. So I think one of the weaknesses in Speckle Park is that lack of information.
So what would you say has been the highlight of Mooi Speckle Park's journey so far?
I think the progress in what we're seeing on the ground from where we started to where we are, I'm a bit surprised at how far I think we've come in a relatively, like in 3 generations through selective breeding. So really pleased with where we stand structurally. We have Jim Green come in annually to assess our animals on a structural basis, and we benchmark ourselves against Tamani and Rennie Lee to see where we sit amongst them, and we consistently sit ahead of them from a structural point of view. Now, they take a few more risks with structure than we do because they're really got to push their performance. We're probably more focused on our structure than that. So I'm really pleased with the feet and leg shape that we have in our herd in general. There's always an exception. Really pleased with what we've done with temperament in over the journey. And then the performance of, especially from a marbling perspective, like when we scanned our T-drop heifers at 14 months, there were heifers with only 4, 5, 6 mil of fat that had IMF scans of 8.1. So we're getting that marbling at a time really early in that animal's life and without too much exterior fat lay down, which I'm really pleased about. So that's probably the thing I'm most pleased about, that we've got the fundamentals right. The fertility is really good. Our calving is really good. Like, we only assisted out of 170 calves this year, we assisted 2 heifers and one I probably didn't need to. So that was it. So we've got those fundamentals right, and that's what I'm pleased about. And I think that our marbling in our carcasses is, and it's starting to shine through as we're sort of getting a real view of it when we get to butcher shops and the restaurant.
There has been a push in southern states for greater adoption of Angus cattle, and livestock agents have played a large role in this. What do you think Speckle Park offers as an alternative, and what should Speckle Park breeders be doing more of or differently to share the breed's story?
They're very powerful down here, Angus, that's for sure. And agents, being an agent, so I have it in a different field, but I understand they're very busy. They're looking for the path of least resistance, and they can place black cattle really easily in a feedlot. If they need to put them on feed, they can find a place to feed them. If they're ready to go, they can find a place for them to go. They can get a premium price. They're just doing what the market's dictating and responding to it and looking after their clients the best way they can. So I don't have a problem with the agents behaving how they're behaving. I think they're wrong, but I think it's for us to show them the way. If you view the cattle industry as basically a horseshoe, and one tip is the seed stock producer and the other end is the chef and the consumer. Chefs and consumers are looking for something different. If you go into any major restaurant in Australia, you'll get basically one of 3 steaks. You'll get a grass-fed steak from O'Connor's or from Gippsland or maybe from Tasmania. You'll have a grain-fed Angus product that's 100 to 270 days, and you'll have a long-fed Wagyu product. And that's basically it. Now, if we agree that it's all beef underneath, then it doesn't really matter. It wouldn't matter what was there. But I don't agree with it. Speckle Park and other breeds too taste differently. We have a different product, but I think we need a different approach than just dealing with the commodity. If you're going, I'm selling by cents per kilo and that's the only measure, then cross your Angus cows with Charolais bulls and get heavier calves. If you're getting paid a premium for being Angus, then breed Angus. What we need to do is we need to create a premier that's consumer driven for Speckle Park because of its eating quality and its efficiency. Now, we can turn off cattle at 18 to 20, 24 months that are export quality, even off grass. We can get them there if we select for the right growth rates, if we select for the right amount of IMF percentage, and we then rear them properly, which is vital. We can meet these market specifications with a product that's efficient to produce, that has a wonderful, wonderful flavour, and hits what the consumers are looking for. And I think that's our pathway that we need to promote, that that's the case. So there needs to be some more work done, yes, but I think we have enough information to say this is a different tasting product, this is a wonderful product, and it's more than just a commodity.
So you are a very research-driven, analytical person. What role does data and objective measurement play in your decision-making processes in your stud, and why?
It plays a significant role, and it depends on what you term as data too. We term everything as data. So our preg test results are data. Based on that information, that data, if you're not in calf when you're meant to be in calf, you get culled. If you've got the wrong temperament, we turn into a data point by having independently assessment. If you don't fit the bill, then you go. That's a data point that we select for. If you haven't got the right structural scores, because we do that independently, we have that done. Like, I'm a good judge, but nothing improves an animal like ownership. So I have someone independent who doesn't know these animals come in and keep us on the straight and narrow, so I don't let emotion of something else influence my opinion. So that's a data point. Then we look at our EBVs, and we only tend to buy animals that are from animals that have been reared in contemporary groups, so we can compare them one to the other. I don't know how you go and compare two bulls who are the same age, but one's been a natural calf off a 2-year-old heifer and one's been a calf off a 6-year-old cow who didn't have a calf the year before and has been in a completely different environment with more feed available. How do you compare those two from average daily weight gain, from IMF percentage? I don't think you can. So data plays a big role there with what we bring in. We only bring in contemporary group performed animals so that we can have a good idea of what we're actually doing. But as I said, everything's data in our head. The fundamentals are the most important: fertility, structure, temperament, and then we start from there.
So what's been the most influential Speckle Park sire used in your stud?
It would have to be Minamara Leander. Just because of the time that he's been. We used him for 7 seasons in a row. We've got daughters, we've got granddaughters, and they just get better. He's been really important for us. But he's not the only one. JAD Quinella looks like he's going to be a game changer from a marbling point of view. He just continually blows up the scanning machine, his progeny. It's unbelievable. Minamara Pageant has been really, really important as well, and he's been a really powerful bull in our program. They're probably the 3 most influential. Based on just going back a little bit on data, what we really focus on the data for is what I've referred to as superseding information. It is new information that comes in to tell us things. Like Cornella's a really interesting example on that. When we bought him, he was 1.1 for IMF percentage. When genomics came out and there was more information going into the system, he went to about 1.4. When we put his first progeny scans in from a contemporary group where he's able to be compared against bulls like SBK and Z Falcon, who marbles very well, to Leander, who marbles well, and a whole range of others, including JSF Whiskey, he went to 1.9 because his progeny, like the scanner turned to me and said, "Are you using a new bull?" when his first progeny came through. Because he hadn't seen that little rib and rump fat with that much IMF before. Like, it was really staggering. So that superseding information is really important. We've had other bulls go the other way, and we've had other females go the other way. We bought a lovely cow off Waratah, who I still love the cow, make no mistake. But when we bought her with no real data behind her, she was in the top 5% of the breed for scrotal size. We used her in a flush program, so we produced a heap of sons. When they had all been analysed, she went from the top 5% to the bottom 5% for scrotal size. Because that's superseding data that I then take notice of. I don't get married to the fact that she was in the top 5%. I move on to, okay, she's in the bottom 5%. Now I need to mate her accordingly, or I need to go, she can't be part of our program anymore. I need to make decisions based on that superseding data. That's what we do. And ultimately, it's the performance of the progeny that determines how good the bull is. Like, you might think I'm sure you've had bulls that in your program that didn't breed like you thought they were going to, and you've had bulls that bred better than you thought they were going to based on themselves. It's just how it goes. That's the game, and that's our job, is to analyse that superseding data and make the best decisions based on that.
Where do you see the beef industry in 10 years' time, and what should we do now as an industry to either propel us towards that end point or change course?
I think we're in a really interesting place in the beef industry. There's very loud voices against beef cattle production, that it's bad for the environment, that it's inefficient, it's a poor use of resources. And I don't agree with that. CSIRO have done studies in Australia that grass-fed beef in Australia, for every 1 kilo of human consumable protein that grass-fed beef consume, they produce 1,600 kilos of human consumable protein. So 1 kilo of human consumable turns into 1,600 kilos of human consumable protein. Even in a feedlot situation in Australia, 1 kilo turns into 2 kilos of human consumable protein. So it's still efficient. Correct grazing strategy, I think, is really important for people going forward. Proper use of resources, making sure that you're farming in a way that we sequester carbon, and understanding what we're trying to do. All the talk in the industry is all about carbon and carbon and carbon and carbon. But the most prolific greenhouse gas, which is what we're really talking about, if you break it down, we're talking about greenhouse gas. The most prolific greenhouse gas is water vapor. So when you sequester carbon in a tree, that's great. But when you sequester carbon in soil, you sequester 6 times as much water vapor as you do carbon. You make the land more resilient because you store more water, but you also take more greenhouse gases out of the system. So it's really valuable. So understanding grazing management and how we do that, cell grazing, and using biodiversity to sequester carbon, using a whole range of innovative farming practices to make sure that we are better off than we are. Kansas State University has recently done a study that found if you farm in a particular way, that beef cattle production is not just carbon neutral, it's carbon sequestering. So I think we need to tell our story better. there is a group of, I can't think of the name of the group, but there is a group of scientists who are working very hard to prove those things and get it out there into the public space. What I hope in 10 years is that that story resonates, because there's so much land that isn't suitable for cropping in Australia, that we need to turn low quality forage into high quality protein, and beef cattle are terrific for doing that. I'm hoping that the end of lab produced meat is sort of coming to an end and not finding its feet. And I hope that the beef industry isn't commoditized. I hope we have differentiatable products. I'd like to sit in a restaurant and go, I want to have the Chianina or the Galloway or the belted Galloway or the Hereford or the British Longhorn, because they're all different. David Blackmore, the famed Wagyu breeder, is introducing a new breed called Rubia Galaica from Spain that people rave about. They take a long time to produce, but they rave about the flavour and the quality of the beef. And I hope we go down that path where we're not just a commodity of box beef getting traded 5-6 times before it ends up on someone's plate, but we recognise the individual nature and the value of individual breeds and supply the consumer with a responsibly, efficiently produced product that is a prime dining experience. Because beef it's the most expensive item on most menus. It's a premium thing. And we should treat it as such.
Alrighty, well, let's move on to our next topic, which is your latest venture. What journey are you taking now to further share the Speckle Park story and to get delicious Speckle Park beef on more dinner plates?
One of the things that became apparent through last year was that Speckle Park has a real challenge in the marketplace at the moment. And the conclusion I drew was the only way we can rectify that is if we can create a premium in the market for people to breed Speckle Park cattle. And the only way to produce a premium is to prove its worth at the other end. That's where the meat research and the realisation that it does perform different when you eat it. It is a terrific eating experience sort of came to light. So we've embarked on a journey to promote Speckle Park as an eating quality product, as a standalone product. None of the big meat companies have got the will to do it. It's just not something they're going to do. We don't have the supply and the chain to deliver them 3,500-4,000 animals a year in B double loads a week. So they haven't got the supply. They're not going to invest the resources into creating a product when there's no supply for them. So it's going to have to start smaller and more organically. And then there's a flip side of that. If we go and promote Speckle Park as a great product, you should eat this. This is fantastic. Rah rah rah. There's no point doing that if you can't go and buy it anywhere. It's not, the consumer. What's the message you're telling? This is really good, but you can't have any. Is a bit foolish. So I thought we need to tell the story. We need to create a platform where people can access the beef. And then the second part of that is we as Speckle Park breeders then need to protect ourselves. We need to make sure the quality of the product is good and that it is Speckle Park. One of the things that came to light down here, the shortcomings and the downfalls of Speckle Park in Southern Australia, is the number of speckle-coated animals but not Speckle Park that hit the sale rings and didn't perform and were a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other, but they had a speckled coat because there was a Speckle Park ancestor in the pipeline somewhere. And it hurt us dramatically because there were a lot of ordinary bulls getting used that were part Speckle Park bred by cheap AI sire. It was really detrimental. Going forward, you can't look at a Speckle Park. It's not like looking at a Marlbrook score 9 and going, well, that must be a weak. You can't look at an Angus steak versus a Speckle Park steak and see it different because you can't. There's some subtle differences, but it's not going to get picked up by most people. So I thought we needed to have a program where we protected that and we were ensuring that the consumer was getting Speckle Park if that's what they're going to pay for. Because we see Speckle Park fitting into a price band between Angus and Wagyu. We think it's a premium product and it deserves a premium price, especially because it can be produced efficiently and with a lower use of resources. It's better for everybody. So that's where we've started Speckle Park Certified. So we've got a number of producers who are already in the pipeline for us, and we've got a number of restaurants and butchers who are taking our product. So basically what Speckle Park Certified is a guaranteed process for you. So all animals are by a registered DNA certified Speckle Park bull. They're all out of British-based cows. No continental, no Bos Indicus, no dairy. The farmers farm efficiently. So they calve down at 2. They cull cows that aren't in calf. They manage their fodder properly. So we're producing animals in the best possible way. So to give you an example, so if you're growing at half a kilo a day, about 68% of your resources that animal eats goes into maintenance. If you're growing at 1.5 kilos a day, 65% of your resources go into into creating new beef. So if you manage your animal in the right way, getting that higher growth rate for your environment or whatever you got to do to get there, you can produce more beef from less resources, because instead of 35% going into growing new beef, 65% is going to growing new beef. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to produce a product with the least amount of resources possible. That's the best eating quality, and that is guaranteed for people that it is Speckle Park. The other part is the utilisation of the animal. We want to make sure that we're utilising all of the animal in its best possible way. So I've been very fortunate to collaborate with the Kick On Group and their executive chef, Jake Fust, and their premium dining restaurant, Cinder, in North Fitzroy in Melbourne. And they're taking whole animals and they're serving all of them. We're creating a whole range of different. We're using the skirt steaks, the hangers, the flank. We're butchering in a different way. We're using seam butchery to produce the Denver steak, which Curtis Stone says is one of his favourite steaks. It says it's for flavour, it's untouchable, and it comes out of the chuck. So something that in often places would just get minced. Also in the chuck, there's a thing called the petite tender or the teres major muscle, which is looks like a little eye fillet, and it's really flavourful, and it's only on shear force testing, it's only 10% less tender than an eye fillet. So it's a beautiful cut of steak that comes out of the flat iron steak, which is basically the oyster blade, but butchered in a different way that takes the seam out of that oyster blade, which really hurts the eating experience. But that cut is, on shear force testing, is more tender than an eye fillet, and it's got more flavour, it's got more marbling, it's an unbelievable steak, but you won't find it. So we're using all those techniques, and Cinder, the Kick On Group, have a number of restaurants. So they've got a Latin American restaurant in Collingwood called Pincho Disco. So we're serving the skirt steaks as a trana, an Argentinian dish with chimichurri there. They're cooking the picana on the big skewers where it's sliced off, and it's like the Brazilian style. It's magnificent. So we're able to maximise the value in the body. We're trying to expand out and use these other cuts and educate people as to what they are. So, for example, I hadn't ever had a chuck eye steak. It was actually with Justin. But the chuck eye is separated from the ribeye by a single knife cut. They're the same muscles, and they're not as well held together, so it's not as pretty as a ribeye, but it eats just as well. And there's all these secrets in that body of beef that you have to then turn your head to when you go, we've got to utilise this whole body. We're not just going to take the rump and the sirloin and the eye fillet and the ribeyes and that's it. We're applying the culinary skill of these wonderful chefs and the artisan skills of these really good butchers to make sure that we're maximising these animals to the highest possible value.
What is some of the feedback you've been receiving from restaurant chefs about Speckle Park beef?
It's been staggering, to be honest, because you go in and it's nerve-wracking. It's really nerve-wracking. But you go in and you know you enjoy it yourself, and you know a number of other people who enjoy it. But we're dealing with people who have food is their life, and they're at the top of their game. And we've been able to collaborate with some others, including yourselves. And the reports back from the chefs are just extraordinary. Like a two-headed chef in Sydney said that it's the best grass-fed, most flavourful grass-fed steak that he's ever had. Jake, we've recently filmed with yourselves and Minamara a story for Landline, and Jake got interviewed. So Jake was Victorian Chef of the Year 2023, has 180 chefs work underneath him. He's a very dynamic, really great operator. And he said when he was getting interviewed that the tenderloin's the best he's ever had. He said that at Cinder, they have 18 steaks on the menu, up to 22 with specials, including Japanese A5 Wagyu. And Speckle Park sits atop of the tree now. And it's been extraordinary. We were there the day we were filming for Landline when we pulled an argy out of the dry ager, and the boys processed it, and we cooked some up and tried it, and which was fantastic. But the restaurant was abuzz because we were in a room next to the restaurant, and people just couldn't help but order it and had a great experience. And they even did Sunday roasts with Speckle Park, and people were thinking, I'm not going to a steakhouse that has a $350 steak on the menu and ordering the Sunday roast. It's not really what you're thinking. So it was a little bit slow when they started, but then the first people started ordering, and the chefs are so good that the sides and the condiments and everything is so fantastic that it came out and looked really nostalgic, and people were amazed at the quality of the beef and the flavours, and it was using a cut that wouldn't normally get used as a premium thing in a really high-end steakhouse as a premium product, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that we get value, not just out of growing the animal efficiently, but make the most of the animal, use all of it.
So what learnings have you had so far while walking this journey that have most surprised you?
They're vast, to be honest. Just all the little idiosyncrasies and the differences of opinion in the industry of how long you need to hang an animal for, what's the best way to butcher it, how much marbling you need, how big. One of the first things was, if we have the premise we want 1.2 kilogram tomahawk, how big's the animal have to be? And you ask someone the question, they go, I don't know. It's a bit unknown. So we had to work out all those things. One of the interesting things is just how big the cuts the chefs expect them to be, given they get so much box beef off animal that are 380, 400 kilo carcasses. So they're used to these really big, enormous cuts, like the rump caps and the rumps are just massive. I've learned that seed stock producers and chefs are very closely aligned. We're just, as I said before, there's tips of that same horseshoe. We're opposite ends of the chain, but the chain isn't a chain, it's a horseshoe shape. And we're very close to them they're very intrigued by what we do. And I think watching them honour the product that you've been part of producing it's really wonderful to see the care and the attention and detail that they put and the thought that they put into the dishes that they're going to serve to their customers. That's very gratifying. It's been a really powerful journey of learning how we need to finish these animals, where we need to get them, what the qualities that we need in them to satisfy these the elite restaurants and the elite butchers and so forth. Because if we expect people to pay us a premium, we better produce a premium product. It's that simple. And that's what we have to do. So that's really nerve-wracking when you send something off to the abattoirs that it's then going to end up at the butcher shop and you just don't know. That's quite nerve-wracking, but there's a whole range of learnings which are ongoing too. We're certainly not at the end of the journey yet.
So where do you see the Speckle Park Certified beef brand in 5 years' time? What are your goals in this space?
The goals are to create a supply chain for Speckle Park producers to get to the end user without going through, like in the short term, we're not going to be big enough to have a Greenham's or a JBS or whoever start a Speckle Park brand. That's not going to happen. So we're going to have to do it ourselves. And the thought occurred to me when you look at the car industry, the innovators are not the car companies. The biggest EV company is a Tesla with their EVs, not a car company. And the biggest autonomous driving company is Google with their Waymo product. You look at innovation in most industries, most of the innovation came from outside. And we looked at the beef industry and went, there's really no incentive for any of these meat companies to go and have a Speckle Park product. It's not on their radar. They're not going to go and invest in telling the story and creating the product. It's going to have to come from people who are invested, which is really Speckle Park breeders. So I thought, well, who's going to do it? And I thought, well, I've got somewhat of a skill set to do it, so I might as well have a crack, because as a breed, like, we haven't got forever and a day. We need to really have a crack here, and that's what Speckle Park Certified is. It's a way to connect producers with the end user in a streamlined fashion, so that the producer can get a premium. The consumer pays a premium for a really great product, and then the producer benefits from that, and hopefully get to the point where we're processing 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 bodies a year.
What's been the most important lesson you've learned in your career so far?
Probably think slow. Just take your time, think through all the outcomes. If I do this, then that happens. And just take your time to think through those different scenarios, so that you give yourself the best chance of making the best decision. So don't just rush into something on a whim. Just take your time and think slow.
So what's one piece of advice you would give somebody either starting a cattle stud or a commercial producer looking to start a cattle enterprise?
Be very clear about what you're trying to do. Like, understand what your strengths are, where your interests lie, what gives you joy, because it's going to get really hard. There's going to be a lot of work. So if you're not doing things that you feel are your strengths, not doing things that you feel are where you get joy. Some people enjoy sitting on the tractor for hours. Some people don't. Some people enjoy working with cattle on a regular basis. Some people enjoy collecting data and some people don't. So find the path that fits what your interests and strengths are, and then craft your path from there. Because when it gets to the drudgery days of whatever it is, because if you like sitting on the tractor, there gets to a point where you go, I don't want to be on this tractor anymore. If you enjoy collecting data, punching in data into spreadsheets is no fun sometimes. The analysis of the data, the analytics of the data is quite fun from time to time. But find the thing that fits you and how you want to do things, and then take your time and look at how that you can turn that into what your enterprise is going to look like, whether you're producing seed stock, whether you're producing steers directly to a butcher shop, whether you're going to the market yourself, whether you're just selling your wieners through a sale, whatever suits your goals, where you find your joy and your strengths is what I would say.
Who has been your most important professional mentor?
There's been just so many. The thoroughbred industry, people were really generous with their time. Colin Hayes and Bart Cummings were very good to me when I was very young. A chap called George Smith, probably the most important. George was a stud master and probably the best judge of a racehorse I've ever seen. And I spent 3 years going around yearling sales with George when I was young. He would just see things. He would see things very quickly, and he would see things other people didn't. At the end of the day, when everyone's either gone home or having a beer at the end of the day in the bar, we'd have a couple of beers, and then we'd go and walk around the stables. So 800 horses, to all the horses we had on our lists, to see who had eaten up and who hadn't, who was lying down, so who was going to recover. He had secret spots where he would stand and he would watch horses when other people were parading them, so people weren't catching on to him. In Adelaide one day, he went and got 2 fillies from different drafts, so you can never stand them side by side. And he went and got the 2 staff from the 2 different studs, gave them a few beers and got them to come and stand the fillies side by side, and he could parade them up and down and compare them one to the other because he wasn't really sure where he sat. He was terrific for me, and he was really generous with his time. Lots of trainers over the years. John Sadler was really great about thinking slow and being really analytical. Yeah, they're probably the main ones that have had a big influence. Don Fairbrother with cattle in the early days was really important as well.
Excellent. So last question of the day, what is your favourite quote and why?
There's a lot. Raja Kipling's poem, If. It's always a great reference for whatever's going on in your life, especially if it's going badly. But probably my 2 favourite quotes are, one is a Warren Buffett quote, price is what you pay, value is what you get. Because like in an auction ring, the price of something makes is basically just an expression of 2 people. That's all it takes for something to make a lot of money. Or someone might be prepared to pay a lot of money for something, but there's no second person there, so they don't. So price is really, value is much more important than price. And then the second one is from a chap called Jim Barksdale, who was CEO of Netscape, who sold it for billions of dollars. And he said, if we've got data, let's go with the data. If all we have is opinion, then let's go with mine. And I like that because everyone has opinions, but you can't have your own facts. And data can be analysed in numerous ways, but if you do it being fair-minded, then you do find some insight and you do gain knowledge and you do get to the facts of the matter.
Very good. That's a good way to wrap up. Thank you very much, Paul, for your time today. Really appreciate it, and certainly wish you all the best with the Speckle Park Certified journey.
Great. Thanks, Amy.